Hello, and welcome to the Paisley Book Festival. My name's Harry Josephine Giles, Josie for short, and I am joined today by Raman Mundair and Raymond Antrobus for an event in a series of events that I've curated for Paisley Book Festival called Minding Language. And we are going to be exploring the work of poets who are working between languages, across languages, and doing unusual and interesting things with what language can do in poetry and writing more broadly. So I'm really pleased to have you at home in the audience here. And I'm especially pleased to be talking with Raman and Raymond today, both of whose work I've been following for years, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. So let me tell you a little bit about them, and then we're going to kick off the event with a poem from each before heading into the discussion. And don't worry, there'll be plenty of time for questions from you, the audience, at the end. So first, Raymond Antrobus is a writer and educator from Hackney in London. He's the author of Shapes and Disfigurements from Burning Eye in 2012, to Sweet and Bitter from Outspoken in 2017, and The Perseverance from Penned in the Margins in 2018, and All the Names Given from Picador in 2021. The last two were also published in the US by Tin House. He was the first ever poet to be awarded the Rathbone Folio Prize for Best Work of Literature in any genre, and has a whole host of other accolades, including the Ted Hughes Award, PBS Winter Choice, Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year, and I could just keep going, but I'd rather that you hear from women's work rather than all of these amazing accolades. As a personal note, Raymond and I, many years ago, had a long-running slam rivalry, which I think ended in a draw at the point that we both gave up on poetry slam, but I'm not entirely sure, and who's counting anyway? And I'll also introduce Raman Mundair. Raman is a director, writer, dramaturg, artist, filmmaker, playwright, poet, and activist. And an incredibly impressive person and fantastic artist all around. Raman is Indian-born, not neurotypical, and identifies as disabled, queer, and a British Asian intersectional feminist. She's based in Shetland and Glasgow, and is the award-winning author of Lovers, Liars, Conjurers and Thieves, A Choreographer's Cartography, The Algebra of Freedom, which is a play, and is also the editor of Incoming, Some Shetland Voices. So we're going to kick off by hearing a poem from each of these wonderful writers, and then just having a little bit of a chat about that. And I think we're going to hear from Raymond first. So Raymond, what have you got for us to kind of kick off the event today?
Hi, good to be here. Thank you, Josie. Yes, about the long-running feud, slam poetry feud. Just to say, I think it's a draw. I don't actually know. I hope it is. But yeah,
I think you should have it out today.
Oh no, yeah, we'll do it at the end. Winner takes all. Whoever loses has to quit their whole career. Anyway, hello, hi everyone. Also an honor to meet you, Raman, and be in conversation with your work. I'm looking forward to this conversation. The poem I think I'm going to read is dedicated to a friend of mine called Tyrone Gibbons, who I went to school with. I went to a deaf school in North London, and this was one of my friends who, you know, you always remember that kind of popular kid at school who you know, I think everyone assumed would kind of leave school and become some kind of global superstar. Tyrone was that at school, but he left school and seems to have had quite a difficult life, and he ended up in a situation where he was put in prison without his hearing aids. This was a few years ago now, and he asked the prison guards for his hearing aids, and they were never given to him. And despite constant pleas to have his hearing aids returned to him, they were ignored, and Tyrone took his life in that situation. So I'm reading this poem for him for a number of reasons, because of my own you know, relationship with Tyrone, because I think his story deserves to be heard. And also there is at the moment something going through Parliament with the BSL bill. If this bill passes, then British Sign Language will become a official recognised language in the UK. It currently isn't. Also, I should say that this poem was actually a commission. I was asked to respond to the Human Rights Agreement at Article 5, which is along the lines of no one should be detained or punished. I'll find it so I can read it to you properly. So for now, though, I will read for Tyrone Gibbons. The paper said, just make that a little bit bigger. There you go. The paper said, putting him in jail without his hearing aids was like putting him in a hole in the ground. There are no hymns for deaf boys, but who can tell we're deaf without speaking to us? Tyrone's name was misspelled in the HMP Pentonville prison system. Once I was handcuffed, shoved into a police van. I didn't hear the officer say why. I was saved by my friend's mother, who threw herself in the road and refused to let the van drive away. Who could have saved Tyrone? James Baldwin attempted suicide after each of his loves jumped from bridges or overdosed. He killed his characters, made them kill themselves. Rufus, Richard, black men who couldn't live like this. Tyrone, I won writing awards, bought new hearing aids and heard my name through the walls. I bought a signed Baldwin book. The man who sold it to me didn't know you, me, or Baldwin. I feel I rescued it. I feel failed. Tyrone, the last time I saw you alive, I dropped my pen on the staircase. Didn't hear it fall, but you saw and ran down to get it. Handed it to me before disappearing, said, you might need this. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thanks for choosing that poem. Thanks for sharing that with us. Yeah, and thanks for writing it as well. And a tribute that's really important and meaningful. I think in that poem, you're saying something there about both about Tyrone's life and death, but also I think for the sort of necessity of poetry in the face of that, and also the insufficiency of poetry in the face of that, both of those things at once. And in the story of a death that has so much to do with a loss of language, a denial of language. Yeah, what for you is kind of the role of poetry in response to that kind of denial of language?
Yeah, it's a huge question, isn't it? I mean, like, I think one of the most consistent qualities I noticed in, you know, what we call great poetry or even great literature is that it kind of acknowledges its limitation, you know. And I think if you're, you know, we're writing honestly, we have to, and we're bringing ourselves to the work honestly, then we have to kind of show a bit of, I suppose, ambivalence or a bit of uncertainty in order to make room for, you know, other possibilities and imagine other kind of things. Otherwise it becomes kind of dogmatic, right? Or the speaker of the poems becomes some kind of god, and and you know, that's not honest work, right? But then in a poem like that, you know, I get to, I suppose, bring in policy, bring in a kind of witnessing is one of the ways that people talk about poetry, like rather than calling it political poetry, it's poetry of witness, which is a more, I think, generous way to speak about that, especially now when, you know, so much kind of political discussion is so easily kind of polarized and camped, and you're trying to find a way to speak through a lot of very difficult noise often. But yeah, I mean, the role of the poet in that is what makes the work difficult, but also in a way worthwhile when it works. I don't know if this is making sense.
Yeah, absolutely, completely making sense, and I would certainly, co-sign a lot of what you were saying there. I'm going to pass over to Raman now for another poem, and I think this kind of necessity of witness and also bringing oneself honestly to the work is something I think of in your own writing. But I'm excited to hear what you have brought for us today as a poem.
Oh,
Maybe you'd like
thank
to tell
you
us a little
so
bit about
much, Josie. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. I really feel quite moved by Raymond's poem just now. I'm still with that. But thank you, Paisley Book Festival, for having me. And Josie, it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm going to read a relatively new poem. Her third eye was erased. Her third eye was erased, smudged away by blind sage fingers intent on keeping her locked into position, trapped into ways of seeing that were blood sore as the pimples that later emerged, hormonal braille, little bulbous blind volcanoes rounded scarlet la like the throats of exotic birds, chirian that trill in song, throats comic, ballooning for sex, for need, for want, signaling chirian blind desire to assimilate, recreate, procreate. This is blind hope. This is a leap. Thelma and Louise, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's later, but the invited fingertips cannot feel the tenderness of your skin. They cannot feel, they are melanin blind, oblivious to the labor that erase geology and flatten the topography of your body. They flatten the topography of your body and disappear your past, snag at the keratosis pilaris that dots to dots across your body, a cratered astronomical epidermis, the tight hair coiled, raging trapped beneath. Baal katke kesh banake, baal katke kesh banake, the same hair to be shorn, to be ripped from the root, to shape, to smooth a root, to want, to desire, to need. I'm woman here, Me, roar, I am woman. Strip me down, pour hot wax, epilate, tweeze and shave, girlhood me. Go on, make me easier to read. Take away my bite. Make me less feral. Make me make me less here. I stand before you, nothing special. Nothing to worry, nothing to harry. I am cancelled. Teeth bared. Look, I'm not a threat. Look, I'm not a threat. Let me in. Let me pass from the periphery, from the margins, from the shurma, from the horizon, from the impasse. Listen, you can keep the chai and the yoga and the pajamas and the bathing and the shampoo, the Ayurvedics and the spices and the curry. I give them to you. I give them, keep them, take them and recognize me. Ears pinned back, ears plunket, ears poised, tongue slathering, tongue gibberish, tongue raging, raging, raging outstretched. Any similarities to Kali are purely accidental. Besides, I don't have the arms to hold the weight. I don't have the arms to hold the weight of your vision. And your reflection stuns me. I'm barely here. Look, I'm neither here nor there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm letting that ring for a moment through through the Wi-Fi waves. Does Wi-Fi wave? I don't know. And I can feel the goose pimples of it on me as well. So thank you for sending that through the ether. I hadn't heard that poem before of yours, so thanks for bringing a new one to us. And I was struck listening to it by the level of yearning that was in there, yearning to be able to be present, yearning to be able to be seen, a yearning through anger, frustration, and how you're expressing that yearning partly through the repetitions and partly through these shifts between languages, these insertions from different languages, including a language of birds, right? And somehow it's as if the desire that you have it can't be captured in just one tongue, right? Or can't be expressed in just one tongue. I'm just infusing now about your poem, but I wonder if there's something you'd like to say about that. What for you is the need to move between languages in that way and to allow multiple languages into a poem?
First of all, thank you. You're just like, fantasy reader, aren't you, Josie? It's just so wonderful. I just want to show you everything now from henceforth. But yeah, I think personally, I believe that we're constantly shifting in languages, and not necessarily the literal. There's the language of the way that we relate spiritually, emotionally, the love languages, the language of vibes. We can suss one another. We're mammals. We feel our hair prickling. We can get a sense of who the other is. And for me, I pick the right tongue to go in my mouth for that feeling, and I feel that I am an outsider, so actually that liberates me to choose all the possibilities, including taking the wings of a bird. Why not?
Yeah, I think that's wise. I think that's something to treasure. And I know that both of you, and in my own writing as well, that use of code switching, or that understanding of code switching is important to your work. So that's that's hence the name of this event in the Minding Language series, which is Double Language, which is about writing that has that approach. So let's open this discussion out. And I'm wondering, Raymond, about your perspective on this. What does switching between languages do for you? And I'm interested here in the work that you've done around the poetry of closed captioning. I'm interested in ways that you've used even tools like radio programs to communicate about deaf poetry and deaf worlds. So for you, what's the role of code switching in your own work, do you think?
Yeah, I think much of my I suppose, ambition with my work is to, in a way, obliterate any kind of certainty of, you know, say what a person is, what language is, what identity is, because the more focused or narrow we get in these kinds of assertions, I think, again, the more polarized we become as people. So, you know, I feel like in so many ways I am a kind of, how can I say, like a embodied, not an anomaly, but like almost like I've been put on Earth to to dispel certain myths around, say, language. So I got so one example would be like, I'm born deaf. I've had to have all of this like speech therapy and hearing therapy. I was told at school that I was dyslexic and I couldn't write properly and all this kind of stuff. And yet I've kind of got a career as a writer, as a performer, as someone who speaks words. There's a, you know, there's a paradox there, and I feel like that. Like I've gone back and read a whole heap of my school reports, and I read about like how teachers assessed me, and I can see quite clearly the pathology or the pathologizing of what I would call, you know, assumptions. So I mean, just one example is when they realized at school that my dad was Jamaican, they suddenly, all this other stuff starts showing up in the report, which is like, he fell asleep in class. We wonder if he's smoking weed. We hear his dad is Jamaican. You know, like, so like it's comic, it's funny, but also it's really, you know, these aren't like the immigrant whatever coming over taking your jobs, and or the lower class working people like outside of the institution. That these are like institutionalized teachers who are creating that harm. And I suppose even that poem, I'm thinking about Tyrone, who like we were in the institution of a school together, and then he was institutionalized in a prison, and there were, you know, I think in some ways both of those spaces harmed him, like, and I think we lost him to the harm of that. And I don't want to simplify it. There's lots of complications. Like he wasn't, you know, he did what he did to get into prison. So again, it's a complicated kind of thing to talk about. But I don't know. I kind of find myself often leading and not shying away from complications and being interested in them. So I've got, you said about, I suppose the way that I've been trying to think about how to use almost, or how to democratize, I suppose, some of my experiences and some of my ideas, say as someone who speaks English, but is specifically from Hackney, which has its own kind of bastardized English. Like when you think about like patois, or you think about even the language that say like grime MCs speak, and there's a kind of like brokenness to it. And this idea of being able to claim a kind of breaking of a language is something that excites me and invigorates me, and is kind of part of my heritage, you know. And I think that might be true of all of us, I think, here. And again, this being something, if you think about it creatively, it's not something that separates you. I'm trying to honestly invite people in to engage with their language and celebrate, you know, what is uniquely them, how they uniquely speak, and how we can celebrate each other's differences in this kind of strange way. But to speak specifically about, I guess, poetics, I had this thought. It was actually during the pandemic, because I'm not someone who watches a lot of TV. I don't consume a lot of media. I didn't anyway, but during the pandemic, I've kind of binge watched loads of TV, pretty much culturally caught up with everything. And I was watching all of these shows with captions on, And I felt a kind of guilt probably about 6 months in, just kind of like, I've just watched 10 seasons of this show, 5 seasons of this show, and I'm like, I'm not actually doing anything with all of this information. But when I thought, well, I've watched all of these shows with captions, and when I was growing up, that wouldn't have been available to me. So I was even rewatching shows, films specifically at this point, that I watched as a kid when I couldn't hear them properly. And so I was watching them captioned and realized I had the entire plot wrong. I was filling in my own version of a lot of films. And often I found myself preferring my version of the film and then being really disappointed and saying, oh, I thought that this happened and this guy did this because of that. And so I wanted to bring that into my practice. And I guess I started specifically looking at how not just the kind of captions of, transcription of what a character is saying, but then there's the attempt to articulate a sound and what sound is. And I was like, how do you do that? Is that a skill? Is that something you have to acquire? Is there like an industry of people who become captioners? And so I kind of investigated that and then wrote a bunch of what I call caption poems. So poems that only use captioned sounds and then try and disperse them along the page, thinking of the page as a kind of screen. And I realized that if I wrote a whole kind of manuscript of poems, then they serve as transitions between poems and ideas. And thinking again about someone who writes, I suppose, a lot of, emotional history, and I'm relying on a kind of memory, and memory is always kind of unpredictable or unstable or unsure, actually. I found it was, again, talking about honesty, an honest way for me to lean on a kind of instinctive nerve, in a way, with the captions, to be like, okay, this is what is evoked in me, the sound of broken beginning, the sound of something ripening quietly, the sound of mirror effusing reflection. So those are just examples of some of them. And then so I was able to kind of play, find a way to play with not just my own kind of, I suppose, emotional history, but also the kind of cultural understanding or assumption of sound and what sound is, and who it belongs to. So yeah, I mean, so these are just some thoughts and ideas that I think I'm playing with in poetry.
Thank you. There was so much in there. But something that was just echoing through me was the beautiful thing you said about yourself, that you feel like you were put on earth to disrupt people's expectations of certain things, of what a person is, of what a language is. It's a lovely compliment to pay yourself. And I'm going to remember that one for a while. I'm going to try and hold on to that one. And you said also through that there was an importance for you in claiming language, claiming ways of speaking, claiming ways that language can be broken. And I was wondering if that spoke to you, Raman, because I know that you've written about the need to claim language and times where you've had language refused, or times where you've spoken about what it means to you to take a language as yours or to break a language. So I was wondering if you had thoughts on that role of claiming language.
I absolutely do, and there's just so much resonance in for me in what Raymond was sharing, and actually sort of I learned English as a second language. I was born in India, but I came here and joined primary school and was immediately seen as being as actually I was put in a class for the educationally subnormal. So it's quite ironic that I'm a writer now in English, and this is my it's one of the many mediums that I work in is a language that judged me, a culture that judged me when I first arrived and said, oh, you can't do this, you'll never be able to do this, and you're never going to be making anything of yourself. So actually I was thinking of that when Raymond was sharing you know, his process and lived experience, because I think for me, I feel that I learned English in order to disrupt it, for sure. Because I was sort of like, you think I'm nothing, but just wait, you know, just wait. What, and you know, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna run with it, you know. And I and then I realized the power of being able to code switch, and you know, because it's also the same for my so-called mother tongue, because ironically, well, quite painfully, in the process of learning English, I lost my mother tongue because of the context I was in. And then I had to kind of claw that back when when I was a young person, you know, in my 20s, actually. That's when I started to really kind of allow myself to learn other languages on my own terms, because I also felt judged from, you know, I felt a lot of judgment. In fact, I made a piece of work about it recently, about trying my best to speak Punjabi and Hindi and other languages, and being ridiculed for even attempting to, because I never get the right grammar or the right cadence. And it's the same with Shetland dialect. You know, there's a lot of kind of like judgment of like, why are you even bothering? You know, you know, it's no yours. And I feel like, well, nothing is mine, really, is it? So let me just take it all. You know, nothing is mine. Let me fucking take it all. Sorry. I got a bit passionate there. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Josie, but that's what's on my mind at the moment.
I think you both answered it and went a great deal further, and I'm glad of the passion as well. I think that's necessary. I think that's something you both said, right? Is that if you're not allowed any of it, you'll have all of it. Again,
Aye.
and I think really
And I think,
generally
and look at the beauty we make of it, you know,
yeah.
all three of us, you know, like I just feel like there's just something really gorgeous and revolutionary about it, you know, I'm really, this, for me, this is really important, because a lot of the time as a poet, I feel quite isolated frequently. So it's really lovely to be in the company of folk that I can dialogue with. The need to reclaim, and not just reclaim, but to actually, you know, process it and kind of frame it, and you know, for it to be a conduit for something else, you know, not necessarily what it was intended for.
Yeah. So I'm interested then in that process, in that very personal process of finding power, of claiming power. What's the role of writing in that for you? Has writing in different languages changed your relationship to those languages? Because it is that there's a sort of feedback process there, isn't there? As we shape language, as we shape the language that we use, it shapes us in return. So what's happened for you in that, Raman, in terms of like, has writing changed your approach to different languages?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And part of what it's done is that this process for me, and it's been, you know, it's been hard won and long drawn, is that I've decided to, rather than kind of, you know, this idea of kind of, sorry, I've just suddenly, you learn how to speak English in a certain way, like the RP, this idea of enunciation and all of this, and you know, the right way, and it's only relatively recently that we're dislodging that, you know. I feel that I actually wanted to do the reverse. You know, I wanted to revel in dialect, I wanted to revel in accent, I wanted to kind of feel that I could have it all, because I love the musicality of it. So I feel like I'm dancing with language rather than trying to write with it, you know? So it's like I want to dance, I want to have a slow dance with it and snog it on the lips, you know? I want to like have a rave with it, you know, and just I want to do all sorts of things with it, and I'm not going to be told, you know, the pace that I should be working at or speaking at or you know, writing at. It's but often I'll be real. You know, I have a collection now, and a full collection, but no home for it. You know, so in the end, it's like I feel like I'm doing that Robin dancing with myself.
You definitely deserve many dancing partners in languages and otherwise. Is there something in there that speaks to your work as well, Raymond? Has because I've read each of your books and I've seen like how different approaches to languages have come into that over the years, and times when this use of captioning or references to sign or an understanding of sign has kind of come into the work. How is that? How is deploying different approaches to language? How has that changed you as you've done it? What's been, how has writing and changed your approach to language?
Yeah, that's a good question. I find that writing has been a way to, in some ways, assert actually all of, I suppose, my identities simultaneously. And when I realized that, oh wait, I went to a deaf school, I learned sign when I was 11 years old, and then when I integrated into more kind of a hearing world, I became very ashamed and embarrassed about my sign, and I stopped signing. I stopped talking to deaf people. And it was solely based on wanting to present as hearing passing, and it's actually writing poetry that brought me back to that time, because poetry, again, is language is its kind of tool, it's a foundation. And so then thinking and remembering, like, when learning sign is a different way, because sign has a different syntax. So it's a very different mode, a very different way of engaging with language, and obviously there's a stuff where it's like it's very physical. Obviously, it's all shape based. The syntax is all a little bit different, but also it even changes your interiority. So I remember while I was signing and when I was learning sign, the kind of dreams I was having were in sign, and often I would be having conversations with friends who in my waking life didn't know any sign language, but almost all my conversations with them in these dreams were in sign. And then I kind of like let go of that, and it kind of reversed, where deaf friends in my dreams would be able to be all verbal, solely, and not sign. And so it's like it was this very strange kind of way of, I suppose, weighing and living with different languages and how do I call it, sensibilities. But I really felt like there was a very, one of the most empowering things for me in my practice as a poet has been being able to kind of see them all, align them all, together. I'm not a BSL poet. I'm an English language poet, but I work with BSL interpreters. I work with deaf actors, deaf performers, and I've been in conversation with them, with a lot of different people, about how one brings, a text on the page in English to the stage in sign, and so much of that, those collaborations and those conversations have been so rich and rewarding for me. And again, I mean, there's no one way to do it as well. It really is a creative endeavor. It really is another mode of exploring and trying to be open to, how one captures or articulates or resonates with a word, an idea, an image, a memory, so I feel like pretty lucky, again, pretty privileged in the end. But Raman said that thing about, like, it being something that's hard won, and I definitely feel that. Like, I've had to win it back, I've had to claim it back, I've had to come away from, I would say, institutional education, or modes or models to be able to find scenes. So like when we first met Josie, we were doing, you know, slam, poetry, open mic, performance, and that had no real hierarchical or institutional kind of structure. And the hierarchy that was there was like, you know, the slam champion thing was a kind of one night thing, because you win a slam and then you go home, and then, I mean, you know, and then the next time you come along, it's like, you know, you start all over again. There isn't like a kind of continued, sustained, oh, this is the best thing that poetry is. You know, you win for a night and then you go again. There was something in that, I think, that kind of kept me coming back to, in a way, cutting my teeth or nurturing, you know, my love, I think, for poetry, for language, for performance. You know, again, in one place, finding a place for it, and I think that was an important part of getting me on that road to reclaiming.
I just wanted to, if I may, just sort of riff off what Raymond's saying, because while you were speaking, Raymond, I was thinking about, you know, the many identities that the three of us hold in this space, and the many languages between us, and, you know, this idea not just of double language, but of multiple lives, so more than double lives. And for me, I strongly believe that, you know, my lived experience is that and I've written about this, is that I was never meant to have a voice, you know, not just in terms of like English and English culture and being in a British context, but also in the context of being a queer woman, a disabled woman, a Punjabi woman of working class heritage, you know, and it's, you know, and I see solidarity with, you know, trans women, trans men. I see solidarity with POC. I see solidarity with people with other disabilities, because I feel in many, you know, what I'm feeling is like very viscerally is that we were never intended to be able to tell our story, or to, you know, to give our opinion, or to have, it was, you know, it's not like everything's been set up to facilitate that.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
actually, you know, our own midwives, you know, we found by, you know, hook or by crook or by look, we found a way forward. But there's something dynamic in that, and something that actually haven't seen much conversational dialogue around. Yeah, I hope this has communicated well, but there's just something that I was thinking when Raymond was speaking.
Yeah, thank you. That's power. That's powerful. I'd love to dig into that more, but I also have another job, which is to ask you some questions from the audience. So I'm gonna be very selfless and ask their questions instead of mine. And if other folk have questions, please fire them in whichever chat you're in, and I'll do my best to get to them. There's a really interesting one here. I don't have the name of who it's from, but thank you for it. Which is for both of you. Do you think it's the gaps between languages where the meaning often lies in your work? Which I think is quite a profound question. What's happening for you in the gaps between languages? What's going on when one language can express what another can't, or when neither can express what you want? Let's put that to Raman first, and then we'll from Raymond as well.
Well, my first response is absolutely, but also I feel it's the gaps in between meaning as well. It's not just language, you know. It's about the leaps in between, and the fact that there needs to be a sense of faith that there is a possibility for knowing and for understanding. And, you know, I feel part of that is the yearning that's in my work, you know, because it's about actually see all of me, see, you know, and it's not just about see my trauma, it's like see my brilliance, you know, see, you know, the joy, see all the stuff that you said I could never have, you know. I am all those things more. So yeah, I think I think those gaps and also those silences are quite profound and shapes the rhythm in itself, shapes the dance in itself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. What about you, Raymond? What's going on for you in those gaps?
Yeah, the gaps are, I think, ways in which we let readers in. Actually, there is a kind of way to, I don't ever want to kind of put something out in the world that feels kind of fully emotionally resolved, as it were. I don't feel like from someone like me that's possible, but I can put something out in the world that is aesthetically resolved, and aesthetically I can put in, those gaps, or those times when, like, sometimes you write this poem and it's all in the first person, and you flip it into a third person and it just opens up a different gap. Or sometimes you have an image at the end of the first draft and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know, actually I'm going to make this image the opening of the poem, and you flip it upside down, and then there's a whole other kind of gap that will happen. And I think I got that from, I started sharing drafts of poems with people that weren't poets, because I really wanted to, thinking about how do I communicate wider. Actually, it is part of my mission to bring more people to this art form. And I remember that being one of my, a critique actually of this poem I was working on, right, by a friend, she said, yeah, it sounds like you figured it all out and you're just telling us what you figured out. I feel like if you put more holes in it, then I get more of a way into it for myself. I thought that was like some of the best feedback I ever got. And again, this came from someone who doesn't read poetry, like reads like novels, but like rarely poetry. And I just, that idea of gaps and holes, and kind of how we find value in them, actually, how we value what isn't there, or kind of create a space for someone else to come into our space and ask them, what do you see, what do you feel, rather than us, giving that to them. We can receive that. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think put more holes in it is excellent advice. That you could kind of give that feedback for just about any poem. Put more holes in it. It needs more holes.
Yeah.
I love that. I've got another question from the audience here for you both, which is what factors influence which language you choose to use in a piece of poetry or creative work? Or I could put that as like, yeah, when you're writing a poem, how do you choose how you write it? How do you choose what language a poem is going to be in? What do you think about that, Raymond?
I think I can't think about that straight away. For me, first drafts are all about writing of the nerve. And then I've got so many notebooks around the place, even here somewhere, where you'll see it's all just kind of very messy prose, and then I leave it, and then I come back. And really, it's not until about the third or fourth draft where I think, right, I think this is the heart of what it is that, the energy of what pulled me down to write. So let me serve this one idea, and often there's like all these kind of tangential things that go on in the early drafts, and I just try and focus them in on one idea or distill them. And this isn't like how to write a poem by any means. I'm not like kind of, creating any kind of law. This is just my own process when thinking about, the kind of poems that are useful for me at the moment. So yeah, I like try and figure that out. Sometimes I write at the top like, okay, I don't always do this, but I have done it in the past. Like, who do I want this poem to speak to? Whose gaze am I prioritizing here? how do I shift, you know, from maybe the I know able-bodied, you know, cis male guys, whatever. How do I shift away from that to talk more to you know, wider perspectives? I've done that a few times, and only because it's then helped me craft a version of a poem which is a bit more intentional in what it wants to say. It's a bit more like, I don't shy away from the kind of affirmation or the you know, the I suppose even the witnessing that we were talking about earlier. You know, again, so you know, these are all kind of aesthetic choices, but also the thing that I've realized that's kind of magic about language is that you really can't hide who you are. You know, even your flaws, even your biases, often they come out. People notice them when they read your work. And that's true of even these kind of greats. When we think about, say, give an example, say Philip Larkin, who's this kind of known as, a lot of his poems have been very kind of kind, actually, quite generous poems. And then you've got these poems which are just misogynist and weird racial kind of suggestions, and then massively classist. And I don't think Philip Larkin wrote these poems to assert his own kind of transgressions. I think he just didn't. He just wrote what was honest and true to him, and it came out. You know, it was in him. It was in his soul in a way. And I feel like there's a lesson there in that. Like, I really feel like you can't, if you're writing honestly, you can't really edit out those little things that make you who you are, and they're not all pretty. You know what I mean? Like, and that's one of the challenges of writing and putting work out there and sharing it, because like there's definitely stuff in there that is gonna, you know, and sometimes it helps you catch your biases or your prejudices, and helps you, like, you know, puts you in conversation with them if you're open to that kind of, I don't know, scrutiny or challenge. Yeah, I've got off on a tangent, but that's like just something I'm thinking.
It's a good tangent, though. It's a good tangent. I love the warning. I love the warning there, being like, you cannot control what people are going to see in you when they read your poetry. And but what about you, Raman? How do you choose what language a poem appears in, or how do you choose how you're going to write any given poem?
You know, this is interesting because when I was listening to Raymond, I was thinking about the difference between choice and curation. You know, what we choose to project and what is actually there. And I think I certainly know that I don't curate when it comes to poetry. You know, it's something that's actually quite instinctive. It has a life of its own. Writing for another medium like theatre or film, which I do, there's a more of a, well, the gaze is different. So I can curate because I'm sort of from here. I'm writing from above myself almost. But in poetry, I'm in it. So I'm sensing and feeling my way through it. So I make, it's probably not fashionable to say, but I make earnest choices. I make choices that really kind of, I really try to tune in and be as true myself as I can. Whether or not I'm successful is the reader. But for me, I feel I can get a sense of whether or not quite quickly. And that's also there for me when I read other people's work. I can see where it's been a curated piece in the vein of Philip Larkin or blah, blah, blah. And for me, actually, an important word is risk. I take risks. And that's probably why I have the very limited career that I do. So it's like, I think I'm committed to taking risk. Perhaps I'm even thrilled by risk. I'd be open to kind of exploring that. But I do feel like poetry for me is a risky business because I am turning up and I am allowing myself to go to places and that I think are uncomfortable for most. But I choose to go there. I choose to go there, and I feel compelled to go there, actually. So, yes, that's kind of like a circuitous response, but I definitely, yeah, I feel I kind of do nothing else. You know, it has to be this way.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you both for this like extraordinarily profound conversation. I mean, I knew it was going to be a good conversation, but honestly, the heights of like wisdom about not just language and not just poetry, but life that have come out of this have been a treasure for me. We're coming sadly up towards the end of it, but we've got a final delicious curveball of a question from Ellen. So thanks for this, Ellen. It's not necessarily about poetry or about language, although it can be if you want. And the question is, if you could place anything in a time capsule to be opened 100 years later, what would it be? Can you explain why? And to give you two a moment to think about your answer, I'm gonna give an answer, which is that I would put in I think uh, a disc of recordings of highly endangered languages, and ideally a book of how you learn them, so that we can send languages into the future that are threatened into the present, because that's sending ways of thinking into the future that the future might have need of. So there's my answer. What about you, Raman? What would go in your time capsule?
You know, the first thing I thought of was actually a brain scan of different types of, folk. Like, it'd be quite interesting to have like brain scan of someone like Trump, a brain scan of the idiot we've got at Westminster, and a brain scan of folk like us, and see if there's any change. What can we tell from these things? And then later on, see if there's any. Have we evolved? I just find it fascinating. For me as well. I think another role that language plays is a connecting mean, different aspects of humanity, and I can't, poetry can be such a beautiful tool towards that connection, and I just find it astonishing that the folk that we give all this power to, they don't utilize that at all. They're not interested in that, So anyway, I could talk about it for hours, but yeah, brain scans. Neuroplasticity.
Brain scans, wonderful. What about you, Raymond?
I just want to say quickly that I love that idea of the brain scans and the kind of whose brain scan, like, because then that's the whole thing about value and our value system and how we can just slot that. Amazing. That's such a good answer. I could think about this question for a while, but I think I'm just going to say the instinctive thing, which is I've got a box, and in this box is kind of a pile of my grandfather's sermons. He was a preacher, and then coupled with tapes that my dad made of him, like kind of DJing and like cutting up the tapes and recording his voice over them, and I think I would like put that into the future in a similar way to kind of, again, it's all about kind of holding up, I suppose, the people who I personally don't feel were valued in their lives. In terms of their family, they were, but in terms of, I suppose, I have a thing for seeing people publicly acknowledged and praised, and I have come to find that I have a very strange, unexplainable yearning to see people I love being seen and understood, and so I think that's something I've put in there and try and share with the future.
Beautiful. Thank you. I too have a thing for people being acknowledged and praised, and so I will acknowledge and praise both of you for your writing, for your poems, and for your conversation this afternoon. It's been a really nice way to spend an hour on an extremely stormy Saturday afternoon. If you've enjoyed this event, audience at home, then please tell other people about it, because it's going to be available on the Paisley Book Fest YouTube channel for about a month. So you will be able to watch it back and write down those snippets of wisdom on poetry and life. If you also wish to know more or hear more or read more from Raymond and Raman, you can find both of their books at the Paisley Book Festival bookshop, which is also online at bookshop.org/shop/Paisley Book Fest, where you can find book lists curated by event, and also book lists for the festival as a whole. Including Raymond's most recent, The Perseverance. Or is it The Perseverance? I've been saying Perseverance. Perseverance?
I get it. I get, like, perseverance is a good word. I like the severance and the severing of it, but it is perseverance. But still, I'll take it.
Okay, yeah, The Perseverance. And Raman Mundair's the choreographers, cartography and lovers, liars, conjurers, and thieves. The link to that has also been posted in our chat. So yeah, buy the books from the authors, share the event with other folk. You can also donate to support the festival at the link in the chat. And with those demands out of the way, it just remains to say thank you so much to Raymond Antrobus and to Raman Mundair for your beautiful words this afternoon. And I look forward to future poems, future art, and future conversations, and whatever languages we make up in the future too. So thank you.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Raman.
Right.